Still spouting the wisdom of the Jedi, I see. Maybe there is more truth in their code than I ever believed. I cannot help but wonder, Revan, what would have happened had our positions been reversed? What if fate had decreed I would be captured by the Jedi? Could I have returned to the light as you did? If you had not led me down the dark path in the first place, what destiny would I have found?
But what if that actually happened? Hey guys, EvanNova95 here, coming at you with another Star Wars discussion video. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is without question one of the greatest Star Wars video games ever made, and arguably one of the most influential RPGs of its generation. With its insane levels of character customization and branching story paths, it truly is one of those games you can play a dozen times over and not have the same experience. While we as fans of course all have our own opinions, my personal favorite aspect of this game was always how it expanded the Star Wars universe and introduced us to characters that have gone on to become fan favorites to this day. Chief among those characters for many was the duo of Revan and Darth Malak, who served as the primary protagonist and antagonist of the game respectively. While their exact backstories have never been fully flushed out, what is known is that the two were amongst the most powerful and influential Jedi of their day before defecting from the Order to lead Republic forces against the invading Mandalorians, eventually succeeding in driving them off. This would unfortunately not be the end of their struggles, as shortly after their victory, the pair would locate the secret Sith Empire under Emperor Vitiate and be dominated by his powers, driving them into the embrace of the dark side. Though they were able to somewhat resist the Emperor's domination, the damage was done, and the newly christened Sith Lords made their way back to Republic space and plunged the galaxy into another horrendous war. Having discovered the location of the Star Forge, an ancient Rakatan weapon of unspeakable power, all seemed lost until fate took an unexpected turn. Darth Malak, ever the ambitious one, betrayed his master and fired on his flagship with the intent of killing him, assuming the mantle of Dark Lord for himself. However, unbeknownst to him, Revan had actually survived, having been rescued by the Jedi strike team sent to kill him and rehabilitated into the Order's primary agent against Malik. The two ultimately confronted each other aboard the Star Forge, and Revan was victorious. And yada yada yada, we all know the story from there. However, what I want to explore in today's video is what if the destinies of Revan and Darth Malak had essentially been swapped? What would have happened to the story of Kotor, nay, the story of Star Wars itself, if Revan had continued his reign as Darth Revan and Malik had been the one to be captured by the Jedi and redeemed? Now, I could have written a full script for this, but you guys seem to really like these fireside chat style videos, and frankly, I wanted to get this out as soon as possible since I love the idea, so we're just gonna go freestyle after this intro. Also, I'm not even going to be coy about who's joining me for this discussion, since he's literally been with me for the past several. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him, you love him, you can't live without him. My friend, Jenserai1.
Hello, YouTube.
All right, man, you ready to tackle our first ever What If video?
No, absolutely not. You're wasting my time. Get out of my face, Evan.
Well, too bad, you're doing it anyway, so strap in.
Damn
it! Okay, well, with that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, so as with any what-if scenario, I think our first step should be discussing the catalyst. What event or events took place in order to send the KOTOR timeline down this path? And honestly, I actually think it's a rather simple question to answer. Darth Revan discovers that Darth Malak is planning to betray him, and in typical Sith fashion, decides to betray him instead. Now, as for how he finds out about this, again, I don't think it's that much of a leap to assume that he'd be able to figure this out. Darth Revan is, without question, one of the most intelligent Dark Lords in the entire Star Wars franchise. Whether or not he's on the level of beings like Darth Plagueis or Darth Sidious is, of course, debatable. But even if he's not, I honestly don't think it would be that difficult for him to come to this conclusion. Masters betraying apprentices is literally something that the Sith Order has dealt with since the beginning, so I'm sure he'd have some idea that something like this was coming. And if you really need an explanation, okay, well, maybe one of Darth Malak's minions defected and warned Revan, or maybe Revan was torturing one of Malak's subordinates and they let something slip, or more than likely anything else, he just figures it out himself. Again, I really don't think it would be that difficult for him.
He just saw it coming, because at the end of the day, Darth Malak is not a very subtle individual.
No, I mean, I think Darth Malak is subtle in the same way someone like Vader is subtle. It's not he can do it when he wants to. It's just not something he really prefers doing. He's always been more of an upfront person.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually, which also leads us into precisely how the situation would play out. And it would literally just be, Revan would probably command Malak to change out their flagships, and they just command different ships. So that way when the Jedi Strike Team showed up, it's Malak waiting in the room for them instead of Revan.
Yeah, and as for how we would get there, again, I'm sure Revan is more than intelligent enough to, sway Malak into doing this. It doesn't even have to be a direct order. He could just kind of... I feel like one instance that this could possibly take place is maybe Revan would sort of stroke Malak's ego a little bit, like, oh, Malak, these Jedi are coming to attack me. I'm the tactician, but, you're the warrior between the two of us. Then, there'll be nothing you can't handle. Just, don't kill the one with the yellow lightsaber and just have fun. I have full faith in you. Something like that.
Yeah, because it is a confirmed fact within the lore that Malak was apparently a superior lightsaber duelist. So the idea of him... he was already serving as Revan's military enforcer, and he's probably been commanded to engage Jedi groups like this before, so...
And as for why the Jedi wouldn't be able to sense him and realize something's up, again, you could probably explain that away. Either Malak hiding his Force signature or Revan arming him with some sort of special Sith talisman or something that clouds the Jedi senses. Again, there's a million ways you could come to this, but it's really...
there are powers and devices that allow you to do this. Like, it's multiple choice, or all of the above.
Exactly. So again, you don't really have to take too many leaps to come to this sort of conclusion. So basically, the Prologue of Kotor goes basically the same way. Bastila and her band confront Malak at his flagship. Revan fires on them, and Malak is put near death, and the Jedi take him in. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Now, the big difference in how this would play out within the context of KOTOR 1's plot is, unless the Jedi subjected Malak to extensive reconstructive surgery, there's no way he could conceal his identity. Everyone he meets would know that he is Malak.
Exactly, he kind of stands out a bit more than Revan. Revan had the advantage of Galactic Public not knowing what he actually looked like. He had the
advantage of anonymity because he literally wore a full face concealing mask.
Yeah, and armor and cloak as well.
Yeah, Malak, on the other hand, it's like his face is out there. He has that jaw guard for a reason because he's got nothing below the lip. And he runs around in a skin-tight bodysuit, so it's not even like his physical dimensions are at all uncertain. He's a big, burly muscle tank with a metal collar.
Exactly, and again, there's multiple ways you could get around this. Like, I liked what you brought up a few days ago for discussing the pre-notes for this. I don't see it out of the realm that the Jedi could just, take off the big fuck-off, guard on his jaw and just surgically implant a metal jaw into his face and just put some synth flesh on it. I mean, it's not like the technology isn't there. It would be something very simple for them to do. In fact, they could even go the extra mile and maybe, I don't know, graft some hair onto his head to make him look even less, like Darth Malak.
Yep. And it's also, I remember it's explained in one of Demigol's journals that Malak's height isn't natural. He was actually subjected his spine was stretched when he was a Mandalorian captive and was being experimented on by Demigol. So one of the possible reconstructive surgery options is correcting his spine deformation and restoring his original height.
He wakes up and he's shorter, but he doesn't know it.
You know, another thing that's interesting, given the reconstructive surgery option, it would also lead to a very different manifestation of dark side degradation if you, as the PC, choose to be evil. Because I imagine that prosthetic jaw is probably one of the first things that would start rotting away, because dark side degradation might lead to his body rejecting it.
Right, that's definitely a possibility. So, okay, we got the setup, we got reconstructive surgery. I feel like, again, the events in the quote-unquote, prologue of the game, I feel like would go pretty much the same way. He hooks up with Bastila, and they make it off planet, and events occur, and they eventually make their way to the Dantooine Jedi Temple, where Malik receives. He'd probably have to spend a little bit longer there retraining himself than Revan had to, due to the fact that Malik is inherently a bit less powerful than Revan. So that's a possibility, but I feel like, obviously the force bond between, Revan and Bastila was created when Revan lost his memory. So I guess the question is, would that still happen? And I don't really feel like there's any reason that it wouldn't.
But at the same time, there might be a reason for it. It is possible that might not form simply because Malik and Bastila's minds are not compatible in the same way that Revan was. Because Revan was a very strong intellectual Sith Lord. Everything he did was thought-based. Bastila's primary power is battle meditation. So I feel like their bond was kind of forged on the basis of a mutual affinity for sense branch abilities and telepathy. Whereas Malik, he's very much a classical Sith warrior. Like, his academic studies as a Dark Lord were primarily scientific, delving into Rakatan technology. He doesn't seem to have that same affinity for force perception that Revan had. So on that basis, there is a possibility that the bond would not form just because they're too different.
Again, I see what you're going for, but it's like, I don't know, with Malik's place in history, it's like I agree with you, the bond wouldn't be the same, but I feel like there still would be some connection there. If nothing else, I feel like the whole memory flashes that are shared between Revan and Bastila while on Dantooine, I feel like something like that would still happen with Malik. They just might be a little bit...
Especially given that Malik was actually present for all of those same flashes. He did personally visit all of the Starforge maps with Revan, so he would possess those memories as well.
Exactly, which goes into the rest of the game. So Malik knows, subconsciously at least, or I guess Alec in this case, whatever you want to call him, after his Jedi training, he'd experience those visions, and the Council, I feel like it would proceed very similarly. They would send him out to locate the star maps and build up his powers, and the game takes place. And okay, so I know a lot of people might be a little pissed off by what I'm about to say. I feel like in a technical sense, most of the events that Revan accomplished in, at least the first half of KOTOR aren't outside of Malik's capabilities. Like, redeeming Juhani, finding, the life debt with Zalabar and all that. Like, these are things I don't feel like he might go about them a little differently, but Malik, I think Malik does have the ability to create connections and bonds, and he does, as we see in, we don't know a ton about his backstory, but as we've seen in the Dark Horse Old Republic comics, he is able to form bonds with people he has an affinity with, and they trust him. So I feel like, again, things like this are not out of his capabilities.
I would definitely agree with that. Because the difference between Revan and Malik, in my mind, has always been the difference between Kenobi and Skywalker. Like, yes, Anakin was substantially more powerful than Kenobi, but at the end of the day, the big difference between them was how they approach obstacles, situations, and opponents. And with Malik, he definitely make a lot of very different choices compared to what Revan would do. Like, for example, talking about the Manon sort of plot point of whether or not you destroy the great ancient Firaxa shark, Revan would go for solving the problem and resolving the situation peacefully because his whole approach is based around subtlety and nuance. Malik would have chosen to unleash the toxins and kill the beast because straightforward mentality. But at the same time, I do want to stress that even though killing the beast is considered a dark side option, I don't think Revan Malik's preference for that would make him necessarily a bad person. He's just more straightforward and forceful in how he does things. But there are still Jedi, functional, high-performing Jedi, who have that approach and have not gone insane. So,
I mean, you could even argue beings like, Mace Windu or Aegon Kolar start that line every day. So again, it's not like there's no precedence for it.
exactly. Malik would always take the straightforward martial option to resolving his problems. But at the end of the day, I think that redeemed Malik would still have a net positive effect on the world around him. And another possibility that I think is worth considering is how would redeemed Malik's skills develop when he's subjected to Jedi retraining? Would he just turn into Alec, the man he was before the war, or would he turn into something completely different because of how his connection to the Force has been altered and colored by basically by being a hardcore Darksider, a reigning Sith Lord?
I feel like it would be something like a hybridization of the two. He would definitely rediscover some of his old skills, but at the same time, his new experiences coupled with his memory flashes, I feel like would slowly sort of unlock new abilities or even alter the abilities he already had. Again, like almost exactly like with Revan. I have this point that we'll discuss later involving Revan's power creep over the years, but what I'll say now is that, again, I don't think it would skirt one way or the other. I think it would be more of a, like I said, like a hybridization between the two. In fact, I would argue that this version of Jedi Malik would be far more effective than old Jedi Malik, or Alec as he was known back then.
I would totally agree with that, especially given that experiences with the memory flashes within the game's plot would lead to Malik as the player character probably more heavily emphasizing his sense branch abilities to basically capitalize on those visions and learn to access them, and in the process filling up one of the major holes in his skill set from before, because like I said, I kind of regard Darth Malak as a very materialistic, scientifically minded Sith Lord in the same mold as Darth Plagueis. He's got very strong control branch abilities and very strong alter branch abilities, but his sense branch abilities are a bit lacking because he's more concerned with the influence he can exert over the physical world as opposed to using force perception and intuition to inform his decisions in the long term.
I could definitely see that as well. So it would definitely make him an overall more balanced fighter. Now, another big question to consider in this situation is how does Malik being the main character affect his relationship to the quote unquote party members of the game? And again, we touched on this just a minute ago, but I feel like very little in the grand scheme of things would change. Like, again, he might not go about it exactly the same way, but I feel like, Cartho Nasi would still, respect what he's doing. Juhani would still be redeemed. Mission Vale would still, trust him, for saving her. Jolie Bindo, he wouldn't care one way or the other because
within the game itself, he already knew that you
exactly.
as the PC were Darth Revan. He knew that as soon as you showed up. That's why he chose to join your party.
So yeah, basically what we're saying is the first half of KOTOR would pretty much play out almost exactly the same, with maybe a few alterations here and there. But I feel like all the characters that you meet up to that point would still follow you and would still end up in the places they end up at that point. Now, the big tipping point, of course, comes later when we have the first confrontation. Jedi Malik, Bastila, Cartho Nasi go onto Revan's ship. Darth Revan reveals himself and reveals to Malik, "You're Darth Malak. You were once my apprentice." What happens then? So again, Revan obviously chose to remain to the light, and Bastila sacrifices herself to, save him, and they get away. Would that still happen? I don't see any reason why too much would change at this instance. I see no reason why, if Revan was able to resist Malik's temptations, why couldn't Malik do the same, especially at this point?
Well, I will say that a possible answer to that question is the fact that Malik is more materialistic and martially minded, and individuals with that kind of mentality tend to be more susceptible to the dark side. But at the same time, the Malik who would walk into that confrontation would be a, more of a hardened light sider who's been fighting Sith Lords. And the other thing is that one aspect where the temptation would be undercut is that for Revan, going back to being a Darksider means going back to being the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, going back to a position of power at the top of the pecking order. Mm-hmm. If Malik were to accept the choice of falling to the dark side, it would mean that on some level he'd be wanting to go back to being number 2, to having to take orders from someone else.
And that was his catalyst for betraying him in the old timeline in the first place. So I see what you're getting at. So it might be differently motivated, but yeah, Malik would probably still resist, and Bastila would probably still get captured.
Yeah, it's... In a lot of ways, the plot of the game would play out in much the same way, with just a few details different here or there, because one thing we discussed in our earlier discussions is that most of Star Wars tends to follow a narrative. Free will is still a thing, but it's like every single sort of spot within Destiny, in my opinion, is kind of a blank spot that could be filled by anyone as long as there's someone there. And for that reason, I feel that Revan and Malik swapping things out would literally just be 2 actors exchanging roles within a play. But the rest of the plot would still play out as it did, because at the end of the day, the Force has a plan, the Force has a narrative.
For the most part, I do feel it's like when we get into this part of the game, though, the third act is where things really start shifting. And again, we discussed this, a few days ago when we were doing our pre-notes for this, but you brought up the point that Bastila would more than likely still fall to the dark side, and I remember you said very specifically that Revan would be more successful at converting her than Malik was.
Yes, because Revan is a much more intuitive, intelligent individual. Malik basically just tortured Bastila into insanity, and then she submitted to the dark side because he eroded her will away through the most direct means. Revan would be like Palpatine. He'd be whispering in her ear, planting little earworms that eventually turn into ear monsters that consume her soul.
Right, and she's, Bastila has, a very strong, sense of character and whatnot, but she is still quite young at this point, so I see very little reason why Revan couldn't, take those elements and, work them to his favor. She would, like you said, she'd be a lot harder to turn back to the light. And this is especially considering the fact that, again, it's possible, but it's like, I don't feel like there'd be as much of a romantic, relationship between Malik and Bastila. Again, it's possible, especially depending on how far you want to take the whole Force bond thing. But I feel like, I don't know, Bastila falling in love with Malik, I don't see that as being as big of a possibility even in this instance. Do you?
No, I don't, because I feel like the relationship between them it'd almost be like the relationship between Siri Tashi and Anakin Skywalker. They know each other, they've associated, and they're both connected to the same individual, but they don't really have much going on between one another.
Right, and there's so little information on Malik's time as a Jedi before he was corrupted, so they probably didn't even know each other back in the day, and even if they did, it was probably a fleeting thing anyway. So yeah, that would definitely be a factor. Now, another thing to consider, of course, is after the revelation that Malik is Darth Malak, how would the crew react? We already kind of touched on this. Jolie wouldn't care. Juhani definitely wouldn't care because Malik still saved her, and I feel like again, Veo, she wouldn't care, and
Canderous, if anything, Canderous would probably hold Malik in the same level of esteem that he had for Revan, because Malik was still one of the guys who took down the Mandalorians. It's like, especially given that Malik, he wasn't just a strategist, he was a great warrior. He's probably someone that Canderous would really connect with.
Most likely. Now, to be fair, this does put a little wrinkle in things with HK-47, mainly because his unlocked memories didn't become unlocked until after the revelation when he was in Revan's presence. So what happens there?
I feel like he would still be okay with serving Malik. He would find it hilarious that he's serving the original meat bag, and I think Malik as a Jedi would finally be in a position where he could find that fact amusing instead of insulting.
Right. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could, I don't know, maybe he could jerry rig 47 a bit and discover those lost memories. And then again, like
It's like I was
there's
talking
multiple
about.
ways you could go about
Yeah.
it.
It's like I was talking about with Malik. It's like his development as a Dark Lord. It's like, in terms of his academic pursuits, I've described him in the past as a Sith scientist. It's like he already had an affinity for technology and was super interested in stuff like that. So I could see him developing enough technical knowledge of droids to fully repair and restore HK-47, which would actually kind of make HK's presence in his party a nice little fuck you to Revan.
It'd be very ironic. So that's a hurdle they could definitely get over. So now we're moving into Act 3. Revan converts Bastila, they find the Starforge, and this is another thing we talked about, but we'll talk about it more when we get into the final battle, but Revan would probably not use the Starforge in the same way that Malik did. He'd probably... Sorry, you look like you're about to say something.
Yes, this is a big thing I was discussing with us in our earlier session. It's actually discussed within the plot that Malik was super duper interested in the Starforge, and once he became the reigning Dark Lord, he was up to his eyeballs in Rakatan technology. He spent all his time at the Starforge, didn't like being called away for any reason, which is part of the reason for why his strategies were so different. Revan, was on site at every battle, directing the battles. Malik was Orcus on his throne, just throwing troops at problems until they went away. But the flip side of this is it's actually established in multiple sources that Darth Malak was empowered by the Starforge because it's a dark side nexus. He was more powerful than he ought to be because of that. Revan would not have that same advantage, which it's interesting in that he would definitely still be more powerful than redeemed Malik, simply by virtue of the fact that he'd be continuing to train, study, and develop as a Sith Lord. But I don't think he would be as powerful as Darth Malak was at the end of KOTOR 1, because he just wouldn't be pulling from the Starforge in that same way. Or if he was as powerful, it'd be manifesting in very different ways, because Revan is a very, very different person.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of people don't consider when they are discussing Revan and his capabilities. In the Revan novel, Revan literally says that he is far more powerful than he was than when he saw Vitiate the first time. So where that power creep took place is a little ambiguous, but it's not unreasonable to assume that over the course of the game, Revan gradually got stronger and stronger. I mean, your stats literally increase as you play, so it's really not out of the realm of possibility that the same would happen for Malik. Now, Malik may be inherently less powerful than Revan, but he would have that same sort of power creep over the course of the game. And then, like you said, Revan would not be as powerful as Malik, who was feeding off the Starforge. So I feel like the final battle would actually be fairly even.
Yes, but the situation itself would be totally different, because I don't think it would take place at the Starforge. Because
Really?
Revan does not like hanging out at the Starforge. That's not his favorite place to be. I think it would be a fleet engagement elsewhere, or even if it did take place at the Starforge, Revan would be on a capital ship, not in the Starforge.
Right,
So,
which would leave Malik's party, the difficulty of confronting them there. And
yeah.
Revan would most probably, I think we could all agree, use Bastila's battle meditation far more effectively to enhance his fleet. So even though his fleet would be smaller than Malik's was at the end of KOTOR due to him not relying as heavily on the Starforge, it would be just as dangerous, no question.
If anything, it'd be more dangerous, because it'd be a smaller force of more highly trained soldiers employed with the precision of a surgeon, whereas Malik was very much throw bodies at the problem until it goes away.
Okay, and then that leads us into the final battle. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, they escape, Revan, they do their thing like in the rest of the game. Revan assembles his fleet, and there's a big final battle with Republic forces, Jedi, and Malik's party. Now, let's just say, for the sake of story progression, Malik and his party get onto Revan's ship, they fight their way through, and they're confronted by evil Bastila. What happens then? Does Bastila get redeemed like she was originally, or would she, I hate to say it, would she get killed? And honestly, I think it's a lot more likely that she would get killed.
Yes, I feel like even if Malik had a strong attachment to Bastila, what we would get would basically just be Jolie Bindu's backstory with his wife. He would have to kill her and would basically be super torn up about it afterwards, but he'd have to do it because he just doesn't have it in him to bring her back, because at the end of the day, Malik, even as a Jedi, would still be a far more straightforward individual. He's not psychological.
So Bastila gets killed, Revan loses the battle meditation amplification, and then we regardless where it is, it could be on the Starforge, it could be on Revan's capital ship, whatever. Final battle, Jedi Malik, Darth Revan. What happens? Again, I think a lot of it depends, and we discussed this, again, I've said this a lot, but we discussed this video a lot in preparation for this. It would depend heavily on whether or not Malik's party is with him or not for the final battle.
Agreed, because it really depends on how Revan chooses to deal with the party. And one little area where I will give Malik a lot of credit is that when you actually look at his tactics within the context of the Starforge battle, like once Revan's party boarded the Starforge and were fighting their way through it to get to him, how did he handle that situation? And he actually did a really good job of using his droids and soldiers to divide and conquer Revan's party, ensuring that Revan only got to his room by himself. And because Darth Revan is an esteemed, brilliant strategist, he'd be just as, if not more, successful. Malik would be very much on his own, I feel.
Most likely. I mean, I feel like you could maybe make the argument that, Malik, he's not as tactically sound as Revan, no question, but he does have an idea of how Revan thinks. So I feel like you could make the argument, basically Malik's like, okay, Revan will probably try and separate us. No matter what happens, stay together. Now, whether or not that would actually be successful is, of course, up for debate. But I feel like there is a slim possibility that Malik
could lead the whole party through that situation, because Malik,
or at least a few of them.
Yeah. Revan's whole deal, he was a strategist, armchair general, he was on site at the battles and he was directly observing things, but what was he doing? He was in his capital ship giving orders. He wasn't on the field fighting people. What was Malik's deal as a Sith Lord? Military enforcer, lead from the front. And in fact, it was actually stated that during the Mandalorian Wars as a Jedi, he had a great ability to rally the troops. So on that basis, I do think that even though Malik is not as good as Revan when it comes to grand military strategy, I feel like he is a much better battlefield commander. He's much better at making his decisions in situ.
I agree with that completely. So in this scenario, let's just say Malik, it's Jedi Malik and a few of his party versus Darth Revan, who's alone. In that instance, I can actually see a few party members might die, but considering Malik at this point should at the very least be able to perform on Darth Revan's overall level, I see very little reason why Malik wouldn't come out victorious.
That being said, the fight would still be a very, very different thing, because Revan is so much different from Malik. The fight would be a lot more psychological. There'd be a lot more tactics. It's like if the original confrontation between Revan and Malik at the end of KOTOR 1, like the actual boss fight, if I were to compare that to any fight within the setting, it would probably be Luke's engagement with Vader from The Empire Strikes Back, only Luke wins. Whereas a fight between redeemed Malik and Darth Revan would be more analogous to the throne room duel at the end of Return of the Jedi. It'd be much more psychological. There'd be a lot more plucking at people's strings as opposed to just direct combat.
It would be a very surreal fight, but it would be awesome. No question. Now, again, as for who wins, I mean, I'm inclined to say that Malik could win. It would be very difficult. He'd probably lose a few of his party members, but I feel like he has it in him to pull out a win here.
That being said, there is still the strong possibility, because we all know that Darth Revan was supposed to be more innately powerful than Darth Malak. Malak might be outclassed. And one point that my brother specifically raised is that he's willing to acknowledge that redeemed Malak could prove to be the catalyst to bring about Darth Revan's death. But his position is that he's firmly convinced that Malak does not have a snowflake's chance in hell of actually surviving the fight. He's guaranteed to die, because the problem is that he's just powerful enough to be a threat to Revan, not powerful enough to be guaranteed to overcome him, and for that reason, Revan would probably make a point out of killing him.
Again, very much a possibility. It's just, it really depends on where you draw the line between power creep over the course of this game and Revan's inability to amp himself with the Starforge, because taking those two into account, I honestly have a very difficult time judging. Again, I'm not arguing that Revan, he would still be more powerful, but I don't feel like he would be so astronomically more powerful than Malak at this point that a victory would be a guarantee.
That's my position as well, because the other thing about Jedi Malak, redeemed Malak, is that he himself would still be developing over the course of the game. He himself would also be becoming more powerful as he levels up.
Right. So yeah, again, it just really comes down to interpretation, but I feel like in order to make the most out of this video, let's just say hypothetically, Darth Malak succeeds and he kills Revan. What happens then? Well, KOTOR 2, the Revan book, SWTOR. How do those events play out? What happens to the galaxy?
I think the big thing is, I don't think that Malak would be rushing off to the unknown regions to engage Vitiate. You wouldn't get the plot of the novel Revan, because even if Malak recovered those memories and knew what he was up against, he'd also know that he's outclassed by Vitiate, because yeah. So
that goes without saying.
Yeah. So I think he actually would be on hand during the events of KOTOR 2. The problem is, what could he do in that situation? And at the end of the day, Darth Nihilus and Darth Sion are just too powerful. And Traya, again, she's a more capable strategist and planner than Darth Malak ever was. So I think he'd be stuck in the same position that Bastila was stuck in during that time frame. He would have to keep his head down and pray to God that Nihilus didn't show up at the world he was at.
I could definitely see that as being a possibility, especially, obviously Mitra Surik would still be around to do her thing. In fact, I could even see Malik helping, shield the remaining Jedi from Nihilus, and the Order might actually not be in quite as bad of a state by the end of KOTOR 2.
They'd probably still be, they wouldn't be able to congregate in any one place because of Nihilus, but They would still be organized, they would still be in communication with one another, and they would still be an active force.
Right, I feel like he'd probably kind of do like a Lucy and Drake, kind of sequests a bands of Jedi here and there on various they're keeping in contact, but very, very minimally, and they're just trying to survive as best they can, all the while waiting for Mitra Surik to bring down the Triumvirate. And I could see that as being a possibility.
Yeah. So I think the biggest change of having them switched out is simply that the Sith Empire under Emperor Vitiate probably would have invaded a lot sooner, but if Malak did recover those memories and understood what was going on and what they were up against, I don't think he would rush off to the Empire to engage Vitiate, because he knows that Vitiate would outclass him. He'd instead focus his efforts on preparing the Republic itself, building up its military in preparation for the invasion, training Jedi to fight Sith Lords.
Definitely. So the question then becomes, does the Republic still survive SWTOR, essentially?
I think it would. It would just, things would play out differently, but at the end of the day, it still would, because the Republic at that time frame, despite all of the flaws, despite everything that's happening, I do feel that within that time frame, the Republic was still it was still too big to fail. Like, that changed a great deal in the later millennia. Like, the Republic did ultimately fall. Like, the Republic Golden Age was basically the Republic's decline. But within the time frame of KOTOR and Tor, the Republic was very much there to stay, and it still had a lot of life left in it, even if it was being beaten back by the current crises.
Like we discussed before, Malik would be able to, inform the Republic and the Jedi Order of the Sith Empire and their tactics, and therefore they'd be far more prepared. They'd be able to root out all the inside infiltrators and probably even get the support of a lot more of the outlying systems. So they'd be sitting, fairly pretty for that scenario. It would be a very, bloody, terrible conflict, but at the end of the day, yeah,
It's like
they would survive.
It's like what happened with the actual plot of the storyline, like in the actual games, is Revan successfully delayed the Sith invasion by basically projecting thoughts of caution and moderation into Vitiate's head after he was defeated and enslaved, but the Republic itself was still completely unprepared. Whereas I feel that within this time frame, Vitiate's invasion would proceed on his timetable and would have happened a lot sooner, but he'd be facing a Republic that's actually ready and waiting for him.
Not to mention certain very powerful Sith Lords like, Mal and Scourge wouldn't be a factor.
Or even if they were a factor, they'd be completely different.
Yeah, so at this point they'd either not exist or be far less capable, which would save a lot of lives. So it's kind of a give and take.
That being said, I think that if his invasion had gone on his timetable, even though he wouldn't have had individuals like Scourge and Malgus in his back pocket, there would have been other Sith Lords of the time who would have been just as powerful and just as capable.
Debatably, I mean, we honestly just don't know, so it's kind of not something you could either confirm or deny. But yeah, that's definitely a possibility. So at the end of the day, would the galaxy be better off or worse if Malik had been redeemed? Again, I feel like it really comes down to just kind of how you look at it.
Yeah, because it's not so much that things would be better or worse, they would just be different.
Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed our dive into what would have happened if Darth Malak was redeemed. If you enjoyed this and have any suggestions for future Star Wars discussion videos, let us know in the comment section below. Thank you to Jensarai1 for joining me for this discussion. May the Force be with you. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys later.
Dun dun dun.